All right, so Revit part 2. And basically we left off a little bit 2 days ago. We basically ended on the topography, and I forgot to mention that the way Revit works is it wants you to build it as if it was a real building, right? So if you don't really know how that is, you may have to use a couple of context clues. For instance, I messed up and I just started making the building. I should have started with the topography, right? Obviously the base, in real construction, you would prepare the earth in order to basically receive foundation. Then we'd build the foundation, which is actually kind of where we started last time. However, just to kind of recap, you can bring these in, right? So in my case, I'll delete it real quick. Well, I'll delete the topography. Accidentally deleted the DWG. Don't accidentally do that. In our case though, just like you saw last time, I essentially went to massing in site, topo soil. It used to just be called topography. I don't know why they went with solid. Anyway, create from import, and of course create import from CAD. So essentially from there I just selected the correct line type or the layer that I established those lines in, and it basically auto produces this topography. Now what kind of stinks, as you can see, is I've got kind of these random points going on. So if you actually go to edit sketch, take a look at it from the top, you can kind of see sometimes it always works, sometimes it always doesn't, right? So there is that. In our case, I can fix it by, of course, controlling this magenta line. So in my case, I'll just TR that one. Keep in mind, TR or trim is kind of like extend in this program too. You can extend to other lines using, again, TR. And just as a reminder, you click on the lines that you, of course, want to keep. So by default, it gets rid of the ones that you didn't click on. So we'll check that one, looking pretty good. Let's check it from the side. Oh, and there we go. We got a point kind of missing in there. Keep in mind, one controls the boundary of the object itself, and then you'll see this one that says modify sub elements. That's of course how you can actually control this point. Once you click on this point, you can actually take it down manually, right? So you can actually just kind of move it. Or if you select the point itself, you can actually type that number in. So like if it's negative 31 feet down, type in negative 31 feet. So I mean, there are some advantages, but let's face it, this doesn't always come up in studio, you know, that you have to make these absolutely so perfect. And to be fair, you could make them, I think, a lot easier in Rhino. But for the sake of topography, looking pretty sweet. I forgot to mention you can hide elements, but it is a little bit different. If you type in HH, it hides an element. So if I type in HH, of course that'll hide and go into a temporary hide isolation mode. It is kind of weird. You have these two different modes in Revit where you can see viewable models, but then you can also hide things. And then there's actually a button to actually reveal all the things that are essentially hidden. It definitely is a little light bulb, this little guy right here. And when you click that, it basically goes into a view where it shows both what's visible and it turns it into kind of a grayscale, but then also reveals the things that are actually there in the model, but just not being shown in this view. If you want to untoggle that, of course, we can just click on, again, that weird looking light bulb. You know, it kind of looks like one of those like crystal balls, actually. Anyway, regardless. Now that we have a foundation, we can start to think about maybe even the subsurfaces. So for instance, maybe a driveway or, you know, kind of an approach to this house, if you will. Very typical in architecture. We can't just walk off the earth onto the building. Very often there's some sort of entry, right? You either have a porch or driveway or something, maybe even a trail leading up to this situation. So in order to draw that, I'm going to actually go to my site view, and we'll go to my site plan and essentially click on it. Right? In my case, the slope is coming down, so I'm just going to kind of assume that maybe we come from the south here and essentially park it right up. And I think I'm going to modify some of the parts of this building as well, just because that's looking pretty tiny, and it's kind of a missed opportunity if that was, say, a creek side. I don't know, definitely where the living room should probably go. Maybe not the kitchen as last proposed. So in my case, I double click on this viewport. You'll notice that now I'm on basically the sheet. So if I can move the sheet, that means I'm on the sheet. However, you'll notice, bless you, when you double click on the viewport itself, it enables that viewport. So again, if you want to work in the sheets, there is something kind of nice about that. But you don't necessarily have to. You can actually work on the view as well. These are actually the exact same thing, right? One's just being referenced to a sheet, and one is the actual view itself. So it doesn't really matter. It's going to make changes to both of them. But in our case, let's draw a subsurface. So we can go to Site Components. I don't have any site components, so that's okay. Let's just draw on it per se. Believe it's in, it's not property line, although, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. And usually it's called subsurface. Interesting. Doesn't seem to be here. Well, there are a couple ways to do it, but I wanted to show you at least the more correct way. It's not a parking component, not a label, graded region. Usually it's in topsoil. Interesting. Maybe it's somewhere else in 2026. You'll find that, especially in Revit, that the things that change between the versions are usually just moving the buttons, which is super annoying because you get used to one Revit style and then suddenly they didn't really change the program, they just essentially put that button somewhere else. However, as I was mentioning actually in part 1, this is actually a unique feature of the newer Revits where if you actually just kind of pause on some of these buttons, they do actually kind of give you a preview of what essentially they do. But in our case, I'm going to fake it till I make it for today and just make a floor. So don't have to really overthink it here. In my case, we'll go to a floor and we'll just draw it on there. I don't want to draw it a foot in the air, so I'm going to draw it maybe a 6-inch driveway and basically draw that. So in my case, I think I'm actually going to end up making my front door there, but for the sake of tutorial today, we'll just make a typical plane. So I don't know, that's about the size of a porch. And you'll notice it's a bit off, right? So there are some interesting things we can do as well, such as like an angular dimension. And you can immediately set these things as well. So if you needed that to be a 90-degree angle, there are definitely ways, but it's not like CAD or even Rhino where we control the line ever so specifically. We can even type in the angle. Can't necessarily do that here. We would have to make a dimension and of course control these things. And sometimes these become really important. For instance, you know, especially with parametric architecture, you'll find that if you move one thing, sometimes it'll move another. So I often actually check and make sure that I didn't get like an 89.8999 or situation, that is in fact actually a rectangle. I could just also draw a rectangle. What's nice about doing the dimensions in this edited view is that once I stop editing, those dimensions essentially go away, and they'll come back, of course, if I double click and want to edit it again. In my case though, it's significantly underground, so let's maybe move that up a little bit. Sweet. So we have a porch. We can get a driveway involved too, and I can still use my arrow keys in order to basically make that porch look a little bit more realistic. And it looks like my door is kind of in the ground as well. Maybe we need to actually lower the topography. We can do that. So I basically just go to this view. Notice that, especially in the in the three-dimensional view, you have to actually move your viewport in order to move it in the right direction. So you'll notice I basically push it to an elevation view. But for instance, if I do this and I go down, it's actually going to go to the side. You guys see that? And that's maybe not what I want, but it was based on the view that I gave it, right, when I actually did those view arrows. So be very careful about the view in which you move something. It starts to be much more important in Revit than, say, like Rhino, where you can move it with gumball and it actually stays in that axis. Not exactly the same here in Revit. But we can dial these things in. We can even hold shift and of course make that a much more realistic situation. Obviously we don't want the floor to be above the door wouldn't open. So of course we can still dial in and control those things. Again, where we left off, might as well make a driveway. So let's go and make a driveway. I may not want that to necessarily be a board floor, so of course I can change that to something more generic, something like concrete, and eventually I could change these materials as well, which we'll probably get to in part 3. But let's make a floor. Actually, I kind of want to see if the subsurface is in there somewhere. Exit. Because that one is a little bit more useful because it actually follows the contours of the topography that you're drawing on. So definitely worth it, but I don't see it. It's probably moved, and that's okay. We'll fake it till we make it for today. After all, we're not actually going to show even the three-dimensional view unless it's a perspective, so it's not extremely important that we have to have a real model. Let's face it, in Revit, we are usually trying to make what we eventually want to build. However, in Studio, we don't have that kind of time. So keep in mind, we don't make construction documents till we get to obviously work or say an architecture firm anyway. But in our case, let's go with a floor and just draw a typical driveway. So I don't know, I'm thinking parking spot here. Typical parking spot is 20 feet. Usually you have about 25 feet from there. Keep in mind, you can kind of ballpark it too. So something like this. It can go off the page even. Keep it parallel. And we have smart tools that are obviously trying to help us as well. I forgot to mention we do have like fillet and other things as well. But usually I just draw the curve myself. We get automatic midpoints and things like this. And for instance, we can curvilinear this driveway, if you will. And we'll keep that piece and we'll keep that piece. So, I mean, still very doable, at least in that regard. But I can dial it in and fake it till we make it. Obviously, I don't want you to necessarily copy my design. I'm really just trying to, of course, just like Rhino, just teach the software. So in my case, that's looking pretty good. And let's go back to 3D and dial that in a little bit better. You can actually move things out of the way. So for instance, you'll notice that my topography is covering my road. So one thing that is kind of nice about that, if I double click on this piece, go to the top, actually here's a real secret. If you don't want to trace that again, right, you don't have to. You can double click on this and you can actually take that purple line, copy, exit, so that when I double click and I want to edit on something, I can paste it. And if I hit 0, it'll paste it right in the exact same spot. So again, kind of tedious, but extremely useful. Now I can't actually go outside my boundaries, so I'm just going to push that way slightly inside, something like that. But what is nice is essentially once I do that, it's going to treat it basically as a new element, but as you can see, it defaults to 0, so be careful. Double click, and you'll notice you can control the height of these as well. So you can have them define slope, and again, some of this just may sound absolutely confusing, so I don't necessarily want to confuse you yet, because it's already a pretty confusing program. In my case, I'll take each of these elements and basically raise them up. So you'll see, oh no, where'd it go? My windows may be hiding it. Let's see. It may be a sub-element at this point, so let's find out. Oh, it is, yeah. So we can modify sub-elements, and actually we'll modify it with these guys. However, let's do that all at the same time, because who wants to be here all day doing that? Be careful though, because you wouldn't want to accidentally take another point. Keep in mind, we normally only have to do this once because we're dialing in a real situation. However, in Studio, not exactly useful because, well, sometimes the situation changes or the professor makes a design change. To be fair, so do clients, but not usually as crazy as architecture professors. In our case though, let's put that to, say, I don't know, guesstimate -6 inches. It's gonna be like error, right? And of course, in my case, it raised the entire piece, so I may have accidentally gotten another piece in there. So let's try that again. Let's go back. When in doubt, you could just take the sub-element itself, take each of these points, and you could raise them up too. Make sure there is a difference between edit sketch, which is the boundary, and then of course modify sub-elements, which is actually these points right here. And so we can raise that up, especially if we were just trying to find like where the building is, right? We could do stuff like that. But there's no real indication, right, of where that is, and we can actually connect it to other pieces. It is going to try to basically get there. Luckily, since we made a copy, and we just use that exact piece, well, we can kind of do it the manual way. Just raise it up. But as you can see, now we can contour essentially the topography to this driveway, right? So where it's low, where it's high, those kinds of things. In my case, fake it till I make it, and obviously just to show off what this program can do. But as you can see, no big deal. Right now the topography is not over the driveway. Again, it took me a while to actually figure that out. So these are the tips and tricks, right? But now that we have a formidable outside, I do want to mention, I mentioned that I was going to change my project up a little bit, so let's go ahead and do so. We'll go back to my floor plan. Now this is what's probably nice about Revit. I can hide an element, double click on an element, and of course change it pretty easily, right? And once I make that change, once I unhide my elements, so if you want to reset that element, there's this little guy right here that looks like binoculars. You can click on this and of course reset temporary hide isolate. So if you accidentally hid too many things and you're like, whoa, start over, you can of course do that and it will start over. I don't know, actually that's a pretty sweet porch situation. I kind of like that, but it's kind of big. So I'm going to add some walls, in my case right here and right there, and I'll just trim that one. So TR, keep in mind you can almost trim just about any component in Revit. So TR ends up being one of probably the more useful tools out there. But as you can see, I kind of want this kind of like overhanging structure with, I don't know, some sort of cool door situation. Now that I think about it, I think I kind of want the front door right there and just make that bigger, but this isn't a design class necessarily. So let's align those, kind of review some of the tools we went over, right? AL is align. So DR for door, right? And once you actually place a door, it's really just a component or placeholder. So if I wanted to switch that door to say something else, I could. And I believe I put a sliding door in here for you guys. Maybe I didn't. Oh yeah, I did. There we go. So doors, and of course now we can switch this to a sliding door. Keep in mind that is the true dimension of this door. So as you can see, I may need a thicker wall, and I do. That's an interior wall. So by default, I think I was drawing on something else, and that's okay. I'm going to hold control on my walls. That way I can basically change them all at once. We'll change it to something more substantial. There we go. And now it's actually even bigger than the wall. But what is really nice is that it essentially did all that CAD work for us, right? I mean, let's face it. And if you have walls going the wrong way, again, you can click these walls, spacebar, and of course move them correctly. And what I mean by that is obviously we want the stone on the outside, not the inside, right? We also don't want to like get some weird flips in there, as you guys saw. But again, as simple as spacebar to of course flip those, just like you saw with the doors or anything like that. Obviously going the wrong way, flip it, going the wrong way, so let's flip it, those kinds of things. And it looks like I just kind of drew them all the wrong way. That's okay. You can also match elements, so MA as in ma, right? You can click on an element that you want to change and it'll change it to the next one that you click on. So that's really useful. It's called match properties, but for short it's MA, right? So that's definitely one to write down. You can also align walls, so AL, like if you were just unsure if that wall was aligned or not. Keep in mind it's going to kind of default, like if you hover around your wall, as I was mentioning in part 1, we can flip through these by hitting tab, and it's going to actually select, I'm just hitting tab right now, and it's going to select, hey, did you mean this line, this line, this line? Very similar to Rhino, but without the little drop window. So again, if I want to align to a certain element, or check that alignment and see that it is in fact aligned, so I don't actually have to do that. In my case, my walls kind of got off base, so again, typically I usually align, the outer stud wall to the floor. That is essentially what we do in real architecture, right? The outside stud wall is to the outside of that floor. If you can't see it, move it out of the way real quick, right? Get it out of there. Sometimes it's actually connected to the floor itself, and it's acting like a host. So if I change the floor, it changes the wall too. As you can see, it changed my floor dramatically. So in my case, let's conform the floor to the wall, not the wall to the floor. Sweet. So now we got an outside porch area. We got some nice rock going. Let's check it out. Not too shabby. definitely a nice little situation. But as you can see, we have all kinds of stuff going on, so we'll definitely talk about roofs today and probably add another story to this guy. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to our elevations because we need to set a height. So I'm just going to go to the sheet for that one. Sweet. And as you can see, I need to change my view. So far clip view, let's go with 100 feet. That way I can see a little bit more of the building. And same here. Keep in mind, this is basically me manually putting in that number, but you guys saw it last time as something on the floor plan. So if you went to floor plan, you change the elevation. I'm basically just changing that other piece, right? Doesn't necessarily have to be 100 feet, but obviously 100 feet. Notice though, it's creating a section line, so be careful. Elevations can suddenly turn into sections if that line is actually going through your building. So, you know, there are ways around that. But in my case, let's extend it and we get the full elevations, at least from last time. We've made some changes. Very often we actually line these elements up, and you'll notice some of the annotations are kind of like smart annotations. If we click this little recycle button, it'll actually has different options. So this is the one that you guys are probably familiar with, right? But that's an actual architectural standard. Now, if you don't want it to be a rectangle, of course you can double click on this, turn it into a triangle, but that's a little bit more advanced, but technically possible. In our case though, let's get the other elevation. Sweet. Oh, we do. Level 3. All right, we're ready to go. However, that looks kind of dramatic, at least in terms of height. So double click, DI for dimension. And we'll do multiple dimensions there. And just like any other part in Revit, when you have a dimension connected, you can control it. And we'll set that down to 12. We'll make it consistent, maybe 13.6 and 12. Not bad. So let's make our next floor, add some windows. I don't know, I'm already seeing potential windows there. That looks pretty nice. Some potential windows there. I mean, those are kind of big. Obviously, I'll make that a little bit smaller. I don't know, sometimes I just kind of put these things, especially if I'm designing in Revit like I am today, just to kind of get the feel of composition. Maybe a high window up there too, especially if it's that high. I mean, 13.6 is pretty high. You can almost get a loft situation in there. In my case, why aren't you moving? There we go. So yeah, I was doing Rhino and using my right click. It is the middle button, right, in Revit. So even I get tricked up with those kinds of things. Let's get another floor. So best way to make another floor is, well, technically I have level 3 here, but if I didn't have level 3, I don't know if I went over this, but you can go to view and you can essentially make another plan view. So you'll see one that says plan view. And we can, of course, make an area plan, a plan region, structural plan, reflected ceiling plan, and of course, just a regular floor plan. Once I click that, it's going to go, hey, which grid are you talking about? Since I already have all my grids connected to a floor, it's basically going to say that there's nothing there to work on. But just like level 3 and just like we were working on level 2 last time, it shows nothing there, even though, yes, there's actually something there. In fact, if you go to the hidden thing, it will also show that there's nothing there. Again, that's being controlled by that view range that we talked about last time. So in our case, I want to do an underlay. So look for underlay. There it is. Underlay range level. Instead of none, I will select second floor. So it should, of course, show the second floor that we have. And there's those stairs that we made last time. Didn't really think this through. Like I said, don't copy my design. Just copy the technique, right? So in our case, I need to either continue that wall up or change it, right? Maybe make an even more isolated situation like I did last time. But I think I'm just going to extend the walls just because, you know, spice it up a little bit. So in my case, I can control these by selecting all of them. I'll hold control and get those exterior walls. And in my case, instead of unconnected, I'll set that to level 3. So it'll go to level 3. And top offset, let's say, we'll go with that 12 feet. Sweet. We still need a floor, so I could either copy this one, right? I could, Or let's make the stairs first like we did last time. And the reason I make the stairs first is because sometimes you're like trying to go to the floor and it's just not going to work for you. So you might as well make the part that goes up almost as if we were building. But let's fake it till we make it for today. So back to level 3 and let's make some stairs. So just to recap from last time, stair. Of course it's going to ask us to draw, and I'm just going to do a regular stair for today. Oh man, I don't want to go over my stair. So exit, and we'll actually select the right side. So I'll go with the right. Sweet. And it is going from base level 3 to top level, right? Obviously I want this to go from level 2 to level 3. So definitely double check those things. Sweet. From there, let's go ahead and draw. And you know, this might work. Actually, we might have enough head height there. Oh, wrong side. We'll continue the stairs. Oh, we might run out. Man, we got a lot of stairs to cover. All right. I'd probably want to double check that as I go. But basically, I'm going up, landing, going up, landing, going up. And let's keep going. As you can see, it's kind of controlling that for us. But man, it's an unridiculous amount of stairs. Hold on, let's figure that out. Did I go too high? I don't think so. Perhaps level 3 is not level 3. Let's double check. Nope, that is level 3. 2 to 3. Well, let's try it. If we go wrong, we can always try again.
So I think your base level is at first floor.
That would do it. Thank you, Natalie. So let's exit that one, because it will abide to that, so absolutely. So Natalie pointed out it was still at base level, and that would definitely explain it. So we'll go back to stair. Again, make sure that it's level 2 to level 3. All right, that's the correct amount of stairs. All right. And of course it defaulted back to the left, so I'll switch back to the right. Sweet, much better. Take that other side. We'll basically line it up with the wall and continue. Looks like I'm still gonna have to do some crazy turns, but that's okay. Kinda like it. Oh. Go with the other side. We'll use some of those smart tools to kind of help us out. And as you can see, we'll basically end here and have a very large hole in the next floor. Let's double check that. So we'll press check mark, and basically it's going, hey, you got rails that are overlapping each other. It's not really a big deal for today. And I'll show you how to change those if you'd like, because they're hosted to the stairs just like the windows are hosted to a wall. So in our case, let's double check that. Sweet. Not too shabby. It doesn't look like it got the landing there. Now I could just make a floor, but you know, realistically it's kind of weird that it didn't do that, so let's try again. Back to level 3, or sorry, back to level 2. Actually might be easier. So pretty sure we can make it in either one as long as we control this, but you know, let's see if maybe that was the issue. All right. Other side. Perhaps it's too close. So let's maybe try right there. I think that's what it was. Nope, still didn't do it. Well, we can change it to the left too. Obviously I want to click the wall, but as you can see, maybe it was right. All right. No, it keeps doing the same thing. There we go. Got to get that landing in there. There we go. Looking a little bit formidable. Let's double check again. Better. Got that landing again, and clearly those windows are not going to work. So maybe we scoot them over. Kind of interesting, actually. Very well designed for today. All right, let's turn that off. Looks like I have my isolated view on, so I'm just going to reset that. Ah, that's right. Let's pin that down. I don't want to accidentally. So P in just to kind of review on some of that stuff. Well, we got a wild building going on. For some reason, my middle click is not working. I think it might be actually my actual mouse. Some dirt in there, I suppose. It is old, I suppose. But, all right. Let's get a floor in there. So floor 3. And I could just draw that in. Floor. And we could just draw that. In my case, I don't want to draw the floor like, you know, hitting. So we'll use the inside of that wall and essentially give a ceiling also to the previous floor. Sweet. And yeah, I've got a feeling we'd probably hit our head there, so. Ooh, actually, let's go back on that one. Let's see. You know, actually, I don't know. We may have to look at it in section. See if something like that will work. And keep in mind, these are kind of just placeholders when I draw them, because we can move them around. Usually, you know, double click and then of course move them. So sometimes I kind of get them in place first, right? Just to kind of get the ball rolling. And then dial things in. Stuff like that. I find it just to be a little bit easier. But let's see if we actually hit our head here. So I can take this section, I can move it around. Man, my middle button, I believe, is broken. Maybe that's what's going on here. Okay. Double click on the section, typically opens it right up. However, by default, the frame is sometimes elsewhere. Doesn't look like we're gonna hit. Another thing that's kind of cool about this program, well, if I close some of these windows that I don't need, so we'll keep level 2 and 3-dimensional. If I hit WT, which I have no idea what that stands for, but WT will give you multiple viewports. If you hit WT again, it basically goes and basically redefines that one. So you'll kind of notice it kind of picks the main one. What I like about that is being able to see multiple things at a time, and it's kind of cool to see it live, that when you move this piece, it actually does change the section pretty immediately. So we can actually see if we're going to hit our head or, you know, we need more space. Also, we got a wild scale here, so let's change it to like 1/4. There we go. All right, doesn't look like we're going to hit our heads. Let's double check. Okay. Yeah, looks like it's going to make it. Good deal. So we're not going to hit our head, and that's good news. Let's get a roof on this guy. Keep in mind, to get back to the single port though, you essentially just have to close these tabs and go back to a single port. But all right, getting somewhere. It's a funky little building, kind of looking Minecrafty, but I'll take it. Let's start with some of the roofs, because I will say roofs are just kind of this weird, difficult thing in Revit that are, again, very parametric. I'd say the best way to draw a roof is to basically set the plane in which you want to set. So actually, Gavin's not here to remind me, but I have remembered that we can actually set this. So much like a C-plane in Rhino, we have a C-plane, but it's called basically set, right? So we're basically setting that plane where we want to draw, right? It is useful, but it is also extremely confusing. But as you can see in the preview, it's basically this blue plane. So if we wanted to draw on an angle, we would set that angle. If we wanted to draw flat, we would basically set it to floor plan 1, 2, or 3, right? So no big deal there. In my case though, we can set this, if you click on it by default, it gives you a couple of options. So we can set that to obviously a level, and you can actually pick a plane too, which is extremely useful when you're trying to do kind of unorthodox things in Revit. So let's draw a roof. In my case, I'll click on roof, and it's going to go, hey, which floor do you want to draw it on? In my case, level 3. Press yes. So it's going to set that plane, if you will, to level 3. So you'll see immediately as I start drawing, it's kind of locked into that spot, right? As you can see at level 3. Now I'd probably have to top offset it or do something like this. Go back to elevations and actually set a roof plane, right? And let's face it, in construction drawing, we definitely have a roof plan So it's not out of the ordinary to actually make a level, create a plan view for that level, and we'll call it roof plan. All right, so in my case, setting that dimension, maybe double clicking, and setting that to roof plan. Yes. Now I should have done all caps, but for the sake of tutorial, let's keep going. So let's go to roof plan, and you could actually draw that here. You could, and I would say maybe the best, easiest way is to maybe just make the floor just like you would a regular floor or wall. We'll make the roof. So in our case, underlay again, and I'll set that to level 3. Oops. There we go. Oh, get back there. All right. From here, roof. There it is. And we can kind of just default it as a square. I kind of want to go over kind of the uniqueness of this roof, if you will. So let's take a look at it. As you can see, just like a regular flat roof, that is what it is, right? If I just draw a square, it's just going to be flat, right? However, upon double clicking on it, you'll notice that each of these lines kind of do control something. So for instance, if I have one line and I define its slope and I change that slope to say, I don't know, 2 inches over 12, and that's essentially how we do it in the real world. Now it's going to slope it based on that line. If I keep going, in fact, once I define slope, I can really start defining slope. You may have guessed it, if I define slope of 2 pieces, right? So if I take this one, define slope as well, and change that to 2, check. Well, it's going to make 2 slopes, right? So now both of these lines are defining that slope. And it's starting to look more like a typical roof, but you'll notice that it's slightly out of dimension. And that's because I started changing the dimension. In fact, if you go back and look at that one, oh, it's no longer 2 because I started changing it. So I'll switch that to 2, and I'll switch this to 2. Oh man, try that again. Oh, it's because I switched it again. So I'll hold control. I believe we can just control both at the same time. Yeah, there we go. So it does vary, so we'll switch that back to 2. And make a pretty typical roof, right? Now, the next thing you may wonder is like, well, how do we get rid of this triangle space? Man, I wish this feature actually existed in Rhino sometimes, that we could extend 3-dimensional objects. So I'll take each of these walls, and you'll see this button that says attach. Now, once I click attach, it's going to say attach to the top or attach to the bottom. Obviously, I want this to attach to a top situation, and I'll click on that roof. Immediately fills it right in. The good news is, once I move it now, it changes that too. So, I mean, extremely useful, especially in a building situation. Not exactly in any other situation, but that's okay. In my case, as you can imagine, I could define each and every slope. So if I define the slope here, let's do 9 inches. Let's see what that does. Well, it's not going to do anything because it's only going to calculate what will work. It's not going to do kind of something that, like, setting something to where there would be an opening in that roof. It really is going to abide, right, to the previous command that you gave it. But as you can see, already looking formidable, and yes, like a cookie cutter house, which is exactly what we mean by, you know, there's kind of a Revit building, if you will. But in my case, let's go back to roof plan. Let's dial this in. Overhangs are pretty much usually about 3 feet if you have a really nice house. 3 feet is definitely luxury, if you will. It takes a lot of structure to do that, and it is pretty costly. If you look at any sort of like cookie cutter house, I hate to call it that, but that's essentially what they are, right? Like spec houses. They very often only have 12 inches to, of course, reduce cost, and that is, of course, the minimum. Very often we do 3 feet on the overhang, but 2 feet on the hip. Yes, I gotta call these out by what they actually are, right? Want to, of course, teach you the vocabulary of architecture as well. But something like that is, of course, a little bit more formidable and starts to give a better hat, right? It starts to look pretty classy, if you ask me. Keep in mind, just like any other roof, I have loaded in some for you. So by default, we have kind of a standing seam. And this may be a good time to talk about the editability of some of these families. So for instance, I know I briefly talked about, changing the door size and making basically a 3-foot door and a 4-foot door. But the same thing applies to walls and just about any component in Revit, and that includes roofs. So if we click on roof, edit type, and we duplicate a roof, maybe I want, thick roofs. I don't know. You could actually be much more specific and say like a 12-inch roof situation, right? So I'm going to say 12 inches. You'll see that there's this thing called structure, and I'm going to edit that structure. Keep in mind, this is like for a construction document. So if this is absolutely foreign to us, we need to take Tech 1, we need to take Tech 2, Tech 3, History of Architecture 1, all these different things to, of course, that way we can have the knowledge of these dimensions. But as you can see, it has a finished, a core boundary, the substrate, the core boundary again, and we can actually add other layers as well. For today, I'm just going to change the thickness of this layer to say 12 inches, right? It'll change it immediately to a foot, but again, I can change the material, such as the plywood sheathing, the standing seam metal, that of course would be on top. Again, this is just kind of typical Texas construction, if you will. If you've ever gone out to the middle of West Texas, you've probably seen the standing seam where it's all wavy, right? Your typical standing seam structure. But in my case, once I do that and press OK, don't want to get it off the recording. We'll press apply and press OK. And immediately it'll change that. And again, we can still change these things. So not bad, looking like a formidable roof. Not gonna lie, that part looks kind of weird. So I could double click and define the slope. So undefine. And we can change that back. This one's going to be a little tricky just because we do have this component, so let's talk about it. We'll go to that floor, so maybe to the second floor again. Sweet, and there's the part that we can draw on. Now, as I was mentioning in the set view, now we can switch that set view, set that work plane to floor number 2. Now, it's not something you necessarily have to do. Now, if you're in the 3-dimensional view and you're drawing, it is possible. Remember how I said don't draw in the 3-dimensional view in Rhino? You can draw in the 3-dimensional view in Revit, right? Because that set plane is kind of nice. Since there's no gumball, well, it's basically stuck to that plane. It's not going to accidentally do that weird thing that you see in Rhino. So don't get me wrong, I have different rules for different programs, right? However, just to kind of show you how Revit works, it's automatically setting that view or that set plane if I'm in the second floor plan. Again, I know that sounds super confusing, and even as I'm saying it, I'm like, gosh, what a wordy sentence to explain this program. But it is one of those things that you're just going to kind of pick up over time. You're going to realize where you're drawing pretty much all the time. And you'll notice when you draw in the wrong spot that it'll be in the wrong spot, right? So it definitely comes with time. Anyway, we'll set that view no matter what. We can do it both ways. So in our case, let's make another roof. Oh, not a column, roof, and just draw it, right? Maybe I do want some kind of unique roof that obviously covers my porch situation. So I'm going to do something like this. And this is what I meant by tricky, because I will want this roof to essentially die into the wall of the building. I wouldn't want leakage or anything like that. But again, I'm just kind of faking it till I make it, right? So something like that. I'll even leave that sometimes and just TR, right? I think I'm going to go with I don't know. It might be kind of weird. Let's see. I'm going to take this one and hold Control and select that one. Define their slope. Typically, actually, 9 inches to 12 is more like for a snowy situation, so that the snow basically melts off. We don't worry a lot about that in South Texas. So typically, if you see a house in Texas, it's usually about 6 or even 5 inches, again, for the classier luxury houses. Usually they're at 5 for some reason. Anyway, just in case you wanted to know the skinny on some of these things. But as you can see, well, it's dying into the architecture pretty well, but kind of weird, not gonna lie. And maybe really too high. So maybe we go with the nice architectural style. I'll stick to that 2-dimension or that number 2 inches that we were using. We'll go 3 because I think I did raise that one. We'll switch that one to the 12-inch roof that I selected. Definitely not too bad, but I need to connect my walls. So let's take each of these walls, including those little ones that we have in there. I'll hold control and basically select those. Be very careful, because once you select more than one family, Revit like freaks out, and you'll notice that in your properties bar. So for instance, if I select a roof and a wall, like the properties get super weird, right? So I mean, if you're trying to make changes, keep in mind you can hold Option, I believe, or is it Shift? Option, Shift, Control. It is Shift Control to basically minus something. You could do these one at a time too. So like attach to the top. You could do stuff like that one at a time. But let's face it, we don't want to be here all day. So I'll hold control and select the walls that I do want. Gosh, I wish my middle button was working. Obviously it's just looking like I don't know what I'm doing. But it looks like my middle button has failed me. It's trying anyway. Might be time to get a new mouse. This is the older mouse that I do have, so maybe time. But let's get each of those walls. And as you can see, selecting a wall is actually easier on the edge. I can't really select the wall in the face itself, but as soon as I find an edge, that's definitely the way in. So attach to the top, and we'll attach it to that roof. Sweet. And again, what's kind of nice about this is if the client or professor decides that this roof should be lower, I can essentially go to this view and lower it or heighten it all day long. Something like that's probably more formidable. I just know this about architecture. I wouldn't want water to drop off into my building, so I'm going to make sure that that's actually slightly above, right? That way, of course, it casts over. Or you could go slightly below too, and that would, of course, stop the water from coming into your building as well. Man, that middle button, nothing. See if that'll help. Sorry for those watching the recording. Hey, it did kind of help though. Obviously, it just needs to be cleaned. Sweet, it's actually kind of working. Anyway. All right, what else? Oh yeah, let's dial that in, because that looks kind of weird that it's longer on one side than the other. So again, back to the second floor, DI for dimensions. And very often, especially in Revit, we're trying to give the final dimension, if you will. Again, it's almost like it's ready to go out the door, ready for construction. So we're very often dialing in things to their exact specifications, which is not normal of a studio. Usually we're not this critical or hyper realistic about our designs, because we don't actually make them anytime soon. So in my case, let's set that to 36 inches, because we're, I don't know, it's actually overextended my building, so let's go with 24 inches. We'll go and match it on this side, 24 inches. And we'll go with the classic 3 feet for our hips. Not 26 inches, 36 inches. You can also type in 3 feet. You could type in millimeters. It's just like Rhino in that sense in terms of units, so no problems there. And we'll go with 24 inches on that one. Sweet. A little bit more formidable. Keep in mind I could do that also in this view too, which is what I meant. You can kind of draw now in 3 dimensions. For some people it's easier, but I don't want to confuse you guys, so I'm kind of just doing a little bit of both. That way it gives you some options. Obviously we get a little shed roof here. That's kind of cool, kind of like that. And if you accidentally click on something else that's not attachable, it won't attach. There you go. So it's almost like the program is in control. Actually, now that I look about it, I think I want an awning there too. Don't want anybody to get wet as they're coming to the front door. So let's add a roof. It's almost like advanced Sims. I don't know if you guys have ever played Sims, but it's like the really crazy version of Sims, if you will. I like it. Double click. We'll define its slope here. Sweet. I'll go back to my 3-dimensional view and basically just dial that in. Whoa! Yeah, let's take that down. There we go. And I'll switch to my elevational view and basically just move it down. All right. Now I've got no structure. We'll talk about structure soon. But that's looking like a very blank wall, so I'm gonna get some windows involved. I don't know. Maybe that one's probably hitting a, yep, that one's in the middle of a wall. but you know, sometimes, especially if I'm designing, I'll do stuff like this to kind of just give myself, you know, like, man, you need some light in these rooms. Sweet. And there will be my 2 bedrooms. I don't know, maybe the master at the top. I've always wanted a master at the top. Another thing is you can copy, but it is a little different. I don't know if I went over this one in part 1. It's CC, as in Chris. So CC. You can click and, of course, copy. And that is pretty useful as well. And that's just any element, right? You can copy things for days, but if it's already attached to something, I can't really copy something. At least, I don't think so. Let's try it. Maybe. Let's click this roof. CC. All right, okay, you can. I don't know why you need to, but pretty useful that we could. So we can do that, of course, to all of our components. I do want to talk a little bit about structure, and then, of course, end it with, you know, just putting components in this thing and going over all the different components that, you know, the column that's maybe missing here, the beam. So let's maybe talk about the structure. In my case, that one is actually pretty hard to do in 3 dimensions, so I would recommend that you actually go to the floor plan for that one. In my case, let's switch to floor plan, the regular floor plan. And in our case, it is kind of weird. We have an architectural column and we have a structural column, right? It doesn't really matter which one you use, but keep in mind, architecture columns only go with architecture family, and structural columns only go with structural family. If it's annoying, again, I didn't make this program, but you know, let's face it, like for instance, this column we have right here, there's a beam inside of it. That would be the structural column, whereas this like 2 by 2 foot drywall that's around it, that would be the architectural column, right? So if it sounds confusing, again, it's for the sake of construction, and it's a construction program. As you can see, I have some of these accidentally in my wall, so maybe that one's not going to fit 3. We'll go with 2 on that one. But let's put some columns in here, right? Let's get some structure involved. So in my case, I'm going to go with structure, just because there's a lot more options in that. As you can see, I get beams now. I can get a shear wall, column, structural floor, structural beams, and we'll use actually some of those, especially to kind of fake it till we make it with some of the elements. But you'll notice I can't just model something. I can't just like draw a line and extrude it, right? And it's terribly annoying, right? Because everything does have to be a family. It can't just be, you can't just have random stuff, right? Because at the end of the day, if I have random stuff and they're trying to calculate the building, they may actually get a wrong number because I didn't put that as a piece of wood. I put it as a random piece of mass. So again, I know this isn't entirely useful to know in maybe the first 2 years of architecture, but eventually that's kind of the whole idea of this program, is to effectively and more efficiently build models, right? From model to, of course, reality. So some of this stuff is kind of over our heads, at least for the sake of studio and San Antonio College. But in our case, let's get it in there. So we have a column, and I have loaded some for you. A typical one is just, you know, like a parallel, you know, lumber bar. So as you can see, if I select that, it's immediately like, hey, where do you want it? In my case, I do think I want one right here. By default, you'll notice, whoa, where'd it go? Right? So you may need to go to your 3-dimensional view and go, oh, by default, they actually go to the very base of the model. So if you check it out, we can't really see it, but it's basically inner topography. So once we click on that component, we can control it. So as you can see, it's at -9 feet on the first floor. I want to set that to 0. And in my case, it's going, whoa, you can't have a 0 pole, right? That doesn't even make sense. So I may need to change this first, set it to 2nd floor, and it should, of course, change. And it's going to go to that 2nd level, right? So if actually immediately tells me, oh, crap, you know, it's a little over. So I'm going to do -12 inches. Bring that back down. Again, I wish I could just click the face and move it, but you can't. You really just can't do that in this program. You can fake it and just kind of move it, right? So, I mean, you could do something like this, where you just kind of move it around. But again, I can't move it up and down. It is controlled by these constraints. So again, actually looking pretty formidable. Kind of like that. Kind of like that it's kind of going into the ground. Let's get a couple more of those. And now actually that we go back to our floor plan, it should show up. Now it's you may have noticed like some elements by default they do poche, whereas some elements don't. If that is just absolutely annoying to you, type in VG, which stands for Visual Graphics, and it'll bring up Visibility and Graphics, right? It is also a button right here, Visibility and Graphics, but I don't know about you, but there's kind of a plethora of stuff in there, so if I can just use VG, that's somewhat nicer. This is the brains of each and every viewport, right? And as you can see, it's got everything. It's got the roofs, the roads, the ramps, the railings, the plumbing, I mean, again, I know this program can be overwhelming, right? So you might want to pause sometimes and just look at that. I'm going really fast so I can get it all in one video. So again, I'm not trying to be absolutely unbearable right now, but I can already kind of feel the tension in the room, and if I was a student, I'd be kind of freaking out right now. So I would say kind of pause on this one and take a look at it, because it does have a lot of control, and eventually we'll get into the minutia of this, but just for the sake, right, we have the visibility of the category or the family, we have their line type, their pattern or poche, we can control the transparency, but then we also have the cut. Right, so when we cut through something, we can tell it to do something too. So in our case, we are cutting through these walls or windows, and I can select those components. So if we scroll down to walls, I select walls, you'll see that an override, right, so we can override the defaults of everything. In my case, I want to override the pattern, right, or the poche. So I'll select that one. I'll switch it to solid. And I could even select the color as well. So you saw how I had some of those orange walls? Just for the sake, let's change them to orange walls. In my case now, in 2026 Revit, I can control the foreground and the background. Again, not entirely useful in every single case, but as you can see, quite useful. So if I hit apply, immediately changes all the poche, including the ones that were already at another default. So again, super useful, and you're more than welcome to use color, especially for this project. Keep in mind, we're not going to print it, we're not going to display it. It really is just so that you can convey to me that you know at least 2 cents about Revit, and maybe your future employer as well. But in our case, definitely easier to see. But you'll notice that since this isn't a wall, it didn't change the color of that one. I'd have to go back to VG. I can go back to structural. And nicely enough, these are all, you know, in one spot as well. So I'd find structural columns, there they are, override, solid, and of course select that orange color that I had. Press OK, apply, and OK. And as you can see, a lot of clicks just to change a color. So again, this program isn't great for studio. Don't get me wrong, I know it saves us time in terms of producing drawings, and sometimes that's actually what I use it for, is actually a mass model. I don't even deal with the roofs, I don't deal with the structure or anything like that. I'll actually make all the elevations, the sections, and everything for myself, export that as a DWG, almost like a Make 2D for my Rhino. That way I know how I can draw actually a lot quicker in that program. So again, it's really up to you if you do want to use this in studio, but most professors, and definitely the professors at San Antonio College, do not appreciate Revit, right? Because it's constricting towards design, and that's almost objectively true. But in our case, it's starting to look pretty formidable. I mean, that definitely gets the point across in terms of what's inside and outside. We got some structures, so let's get some beams in there as well. I'll click on beam. I've got some in there for you. So I've got dimensional lumber, but you can also make a copy, right? So for instance, I'll select dimensional lumber, edit type, make a duplicate, and I don't know, if I want a 4x8, let's do it, right? So 4x8. I'll switch my base, right, which is what that letter B stands for, and D for depth, right? So that base element, I'm going to do 4 inches, and the depth of that element, 8 inches. I'll press OK or apply, and now we can draw with that. By default, you'll notice that it's basically just a line, and we can't see it, just like the other structure that we just made. So I'm going to do actually both. And these would technically be, you know, those beams that are going into the wall. However, just like our structure, they always default to 0. I'm not really sure why, but there may be a way to change it, and I'm just unaware. But dang it, middle button, get with it. There we go. What was that? Anyway. Was that what's his name? What does he go by? I forget. Who cares? Anyway. We'll set those, and what's kind of weird about the structure is you can set one point to the other. So if you were wanting to make a slanted line, Matthew, I would get a beam and then actually change their movements. Then I would take that piece that's already slanted and I would mirror it, or again do it the other way, because you can have beams cross each other. But as soon as you tell a column to be slanted, it doesn't want to work, right? Because, well, columns aren't normally slanted, right? But beams, of course, can be, because usually beams go with either roofs or, it's just a little bit more editable component. But as you can see, starting to look pretty formidable and starting to, dare I say, look like a porch. Probably needs a rail. Might as well go over that while we're here. We'll go back to the architecture tab. We'll go to railing. How am I on time? Crap, I'm already talking for a whole hour. Let's keep going. Let's get a rail in there. Sweet. Let's do that again. Let's get a rail on the other side. Sweet. And again, you can't really turn the O snap off now. It's a program where it's always trying to give you an end point, a middle point, or center point. So that is kind of nice, but it would be kind of cool to be able to turn that off as well sometimes. There probably is a way, I'm just unaware. But in my case, all right, we got some railings going, and just like any other, I've loaded these in for you. You can find other rails. In fact, shoot, if we go to BIM object, I bet we could type in some rails and get all kinds. Now, maybe not the kinds that we want. In fact, don't get me wrong, BIM object is cool, but I mean, let's face it, it doesn't always have what we need. So I will introduce what is called Revit City. Although I do have a caveat, its server is based in London. It does go pretty slow, right? Also, it is kind of like you or I could submit models to this. So very often, some of the models don't work. Some of the models are way too dated, and they really don't work. Also, some of the models are not exactly good. Now, they've gotten better at this in removing some of the, I don't want to call them viruses, but they're just, the model is made so wrong that when I put it into Revit, it F's up the rest of my Revit, right? So very often be very careful in using Revit City. But what is nice about it is I can go to downloads, and I bet if I type in rails or fences, we get a little bit better of options, at least in terms of families. Like there's a fence going on. I can't tell you how hard it is to make a fence, but there are other rails. In fact, I bet we could even just type in Revit rails, families, and now you at least know what to type in, right? So railing Revit families, and look at that. Just like BIM object, but clearly with some more options, right? So again, don't get me wrong, I don't want you to get lost in the catalogness of Revit. Just pick something, right? Which is why I've given some defaults. So I'm not really looking at those things. But again, if you're trying to match a precedent, you may have to go find something because unfortunately we don't have the time to show you how to model stuff and make families in Revit. It's true, you can do that, but it is like pulling teeth, and it is a little bit more advanced. Something that I just don't want to confuse you with. But if you did want the traditional 1800s Victorian look of a rail, there's probably somebody who's done it, right? To say the very least. However, it's going the wrong way, so I'm going to hit spacebar and flip it around. And it's not going to want to flip it around. Oh, there it is. So there is that little guy right there, and it will flip it around just like that. Boop. You usually can hit spacebar, but for some reason it wasn't working in the three-dimensional view. That's okay. All right. We got some structure. Let's talk about, some of the really cool structure that we can do to this roof, such as the rafters. No, not raptors like velociraptors, but rafters as in the structural component. In my case, a couple things with the roofs. We can go to roof and we can give it a fascia board. Yes, I've loaded some fascia boards for you. So if you click on here and we click on essentially these little edges, you'll get that fascia board. Now it is set to 4 inches, so obviously my 12-inch roof is not going to cut it, but it does add some nice architectural detail, if I do say so myself. However, I can't hit escape, otherwise it'll delete it. So I'll just hit modify and it'll go back out of that command. Again, let's get some nice detail on that as well. So fascia board. Keep in mind this is where you get your gutter system, your soffits. Again, you start to really learn all the different vocabulary and what things are called, of course, in architecture. But as you can see, I can make this nice and detailed. So we'll talk about roofs today and then hopefully end it on adding some furniture. And what is nice is, as long as I'm kind of doing this fascia board in one command, and I click on it now, it's essentially all one component. So that's usually helpful. I wouldn't do it one piece at a time, right? Again, construction document program. But let's get some structure in there. That way, you know, it starts to be detailed. Let's face it, that's not exactly what it would look like, and maybe I do want to potentially show the rafters. So for instance, I can go to architecture, set my view. In my case, I'm going to pick a plane. Sweet. Press OK. It's going to go, which plane do you want? In my case, I want this bottom soffit plane. So I'm going to hit that one. I'm going to go to structure. I'm going to make a beam system. Now, this is where it gets kind of cool. It's like using Grasshopper in Rhino. But essentially, I can make multiple beams at a time, especially if I have 36 beams to make. I'm not going to sit there and draw 36 beams. I'm going to make a beam system. So in my case, a beam system, and I don't know about you, but drawing in 3 dimensions gets kind of weird. So in my case, I'm just going to pick a line, and I'm going to pick the lines that I have on that plane. So again, relatively easy actually if you think about it. If I'm selecting the wrong plane, I can hit tab and select the right one. And in my case, the hardest one to select is this middle one, although I nailed it. But as you can see, I've got overlapping lines. Right, so I'll hit TR and basically trim them up, and I'll, double check that one. You'll notice that one of these lines has 2 other lines on the side of it. This actually controls the beam direction. In fact, you'll see this little button here. So if you actually wanted to change the beam direction, you could, right? So if I wanted beams going actually up this way, I would change that beam direction. If I want them as rafters, like I do have right now, I would change it to this direction. Now once I hit check, it'll immediately, by default, actually make some of the structure that's already there, right? So I can load this beam system, and this is a hard one to select, by the way. You may have to use tab. And you'll know you've selected it when you hit that properties. But now I can change the lumber, right? So here's the family, or the lumber that I created. There's that 4x8 I created. Holy, right? Maybe don't want gigantic beams on there. Maybe I do, I don't know. But what is nice is I can instantly change all of those in a click of a button. That is what's kind of nice about this program. But again, starting to be a little bit more detailed, right, in that regard. Sweet, let's do it to the other side, but let's not do that all over again. After all, I can set this view, pick a plane, we'll press OK, and I'll actually pick this elevational plane right there. You can kind of see it, right? Make sure you select the right plane. It's very easy to select the wrong plane. Totally selected the wrong plane. Oh, I did get the right plane. So it will highlight as blue as the current plane that you're using. So that is pretty nice. In my case, I'll take this beam system. DM, as in I'm going to DM you, is mirror in Revit. Right, so very weird one. Definitely not orthodox. DM is mirror. Right, so in my case, I'm going to hold shift and mirror to the other side. Because who wants to do that all over again? But again, once you've made it, it's kind of set there, right? So unfortunately, if I move my roof now, it's not actually going to go to that, right? So be very careful. This one will kinda, but not exactly. So you'd want to dial certain things in first before you get fancy with the details or spices. However, that's looking pretty good, and at least for structure today, we may get into it a little bit more next time. Let's get some components in there because that's fun, super easy. So those kinds of things. Usually it's where students unfortunately spend most of their time is picking cool stuff. I don't necessarily want you to just pick cool stuff, but it's a formidable house. I'd live there, shoot. Pretty sweet. Let's go to our floor plans and start deciding maybe what these rooms are. I don't know, I'm OCD about stuff like this. Anyway, there we go. I think that this is going to be my studio room. I don't know. I'd love to walk into my studio. That's my forte. And then basically walk upstairs to my room. I'm thinking kitchen / living room over here. I don't know. Obviously, I'm faking it till I make it. But CM, as in Chris Mary or Charlie Mary, CM is a component. So you'll notice by default, I did add quite a few components for you, such as, a sink, a shower head, more sinks. Some of these, they work better than others. We can control tables, refrigerator, baths. I even gave you a TV in there, and of course a water closet. Totally forgot to design a water closet. Yeah, don't forget your water closets. A fan, just all kinds of stuff. But in our case, one of my favorite tools is like a countertop, and pretty typically a countertop is about 2 feet wide. So you can make countertops all day. I think I'm going to decide my kitchen is looking out to the distance. And once we place these components, you can kind of edit them, right? Kind of, I say, because it is controlled by usually the properties. Unless somebody has made a parameter, you probably can't control it. In my case though, I could just draw things too. So DL for detail line. If I type in DL, I can basically just draw, like I would in any other program, right? But keep in mind it's not three-dimensional and it'll only exist on this view, right? But hey, if I don't have time to look for a refrigerator, I'm just gonna draw a square in the dimensions of a refrigerator, right? Ain't got no time to spare. Now, if I was doing an interior perspective and showing my client or my professor, then I would go find that fridge, right? Because I know that I'm gonna show it, especially in a three-dimensional way. Hopefully that makes some sense. But if you want to add a component, that does get a little tricky. So you'll notice components are controlled by their families, right? So it's literally going to tell you if it can't load something. So for instance, if you click on structure, you'll see this thing that basically says load component. So like if I click on column, yeah, we can load components, right? But they're very specific to those families. Like if I try to load an architectural family to a structural family, it'll just say, can't do it, right? And somehow it does actually know these things. But in our case, I'll go to BIM object, and I don't know, I need a kitchen table. So let's go with kitchen table. Sweet, kitchen table. Download. You do have to sign in, so let's go ahead and do that. And this is why I love being on my personal computer. Skip for now. Thank you. We'll go to download. We'll make sure that it's Revit, but this is where it kind of looks scary, right? You're like, wait a minute, do I need all of these? No. We don't need SketchUp. We don't need the entire type catalog. We just need the Revit file. And let's face it, sometimes there's multiple Revit files. You have to make multiple downloads. But one thing to keep track of is an RFA is a Revit family archive type, right? So they do even have their own extensions. So in my case, let's say we'll download it. We'll stick it in downloads, and we'll go back to Revit. In my case, when I hit in CM for component, it actually goes to this component tabature. So if I go to load family, I can load that download. In my case, I gotta find my downloads actually. Sorry, I'm on a virtual computer basically. Maybe I should put it in my documents or on my library. Oh man, downloads is somewhere. Let's see if that's it. Sweet. So there's that furniture component that I have. I'm gonna click, and it's even gonna give me a preview. Press open. And if it was from a previous version of Revit, it is gonna update it real quick and then go, hey, where do you want it? Okay, well, let's put it here. Those kinds of things. So not too shabby, and now we can directly take a three-dimensional model. It's the exact scale that we need. It's the exact scale that it was set. We no longer have to do scaling in this program, and I will say that's kind of nice, but you need to understand scale first to use the program. So there's a reason why usually Revit is taught last in architecture school. But if I wanted to change this, I'd have to edit type, and of course see if there's anything that could even change those dimensions. And sometimes they're not, especially if they come in from somebody else. They're more worried about, actually the material and visibility, as you can see, rather than the actual dimension or size. So maybe this particular component actually only comes in one size, so there is that. However, if we go to CM, I've given multiple components, enough to really make a house, right? So we got like a queen size bed. So maybe let's go to level 2. I think I'm gonna do my floors in here, so CM. I don't know, heck of a master bedroom, if you ask me. Could only hope that one day my rooms are these big. Go to level 3. And we're seeing a little bit of level 2, so if that's getting in the way already, remember you can turn that overlay right off. Also, please don't print while I'm recording a video. Please just wait. It's distracting and it comes up in the recording. But nobody cares to even acknowledge. You guys are so rude to each other, it's ridiculous. I don't know. Anyway, I'll leave it there for today. Just because it's a very dense video, and I do want to take the last 2 minutes to at least recap what we've gone over. So just to recap, we went over the topography, we went over how to edit that topography, especially since we wanted to go around our driveway. We can make a driveway by simply just making a floor and a patio space. We went over manipulating, obviously, the changes that we had from last time. We went over some rails, obviously attaching walls to roofs. We went over the roof system itself and even adding some fascia boards, as well as adding an entire new floor and continuing on the design of our building. We then went to some probably more advanced stuff than you need to know, but some building systems, such as obviously the differences between structure and architecture. And finally, we went over essentially adding some components from whether the internet or, of course, the ones that I've already provided in the file itself. But other than that, not to make this too dense, were there any kind of questions that just kind of came up as we were going through this that maybe you want to get on the recording? Probably enough to get started this weekend, and I wouldn't just doze off this weekend, guys. I'd really probably make a significant process. Just because on Monday we're going to talk about really stop modeling and start producing the drawings, right? So right now we've really on part 1 and part 2, we've really just kind of modeled the thing. We haven't even really talked about how to make it look good or to even export it into other programs so that we can even further enhance it in Rhino or Photoshop. So, no questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there like a student version for Revit, like how we have Rhino kind of discounted?
Kind of. So you might have not been here for that, Natalie, but essentially in the other video, if you just go to Autodesk Student version, so Autodesk Student downloads or versions, there is student access and you do have it for a year, right? So you can get that installed on your computer at home. And if you go to my YouTube, I do have a video about how to install it both on a Mac and on Windows. Is super easy. So if you got a Windows desktop at home, you should have absolutely no problem. You will need to make an account though, right? So make sure you make an account with your EDU, otherwise they'll charge you, right? They'll see that it's of course an EDU account, and they'll even have to like verify it and stuff. Sometimes you'll have to put like the SAC website in. Maybe, I mean, sometimes like for me, they needed my ID to prove that I was a teacher. From there, you'll essentially select Revit and, of course, student, right? So definitely great question. There's a whole video on it as well, so of course. Any other questions, guys? Great question, by the way. All right, we'll leave it there for today.